My name is Rooney Mara, and I'm 38 years old. 3 years ago, my mother called me exactly 4 hours after I was discharged from Massachusetts General Hospital following emergency open-heart surgery, valve replacement, the kind you don't schedule, and told me I was no longer welcome at her retirement party. It wasn't the health crisis that destroyed my family. It was my sister's lie, which my mother chose to believe, which my father chose to defend, which they both chose to make the cornerstone of their belief system about who I was. And then I showed up anyway. The worst part, the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, was finding my own funeral photograph on display in my mother's living room. Not metaphorically, an actual 8x10 glossy print. My senior photo from high school, from the year I tried to disappear into AP classes and volunteer work, because no one was watching anyway. Someone had printed it in grayscale, had it framed, and placed it on the piano where my mother's retirement party guests could view it. I realized, standing in that room with my surgical badge still hanging from my neck, that my family hadn't just cut me off. They'd already buried me. They were just waiting for me to stop breathing. Before we get into this, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about reconciliation wrapped in a neat bow. This isn't about a family that realized they were wrong and changed overnight. This is about what it costs to build yourself from nothing, to prove yourself wrong through sheer will and medical school and residencies and sleep deprivation, and then to find that the people who raised you still wouldn't believe you were anything but a liar. And then it's about choosing, after everything, to walk back into that room anyway, not for them but for yourself. I'm going to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you who I was before, who my sister Monica was, and how a single phone call about a promotion I didn't even take became the fault line that cracked everything. I'm going to walk you through 5 years of silence, through medical school applications rejected by family references that apparently weren't references at all but character assassinations, through a best friend who became my real family, through the day I learned that the person you're trying to prove yourself to stopped listening decades ago. And I'm going to tell you what happens when you finally understand that your silence has been louder than their lies ever could be. If any part of this resonates with you, if you've ever been the person that didn't fit, the one who had to rebuild themselves, the one who showed up even though they weren't invited, this story is for you too. Growing up, I was the kind of child parents had by accident. Not literally, I was planned, wanted, expected. But somehow, by the time I was old enough to be aware of wanting things, I had already learned that my wanting things was not interesting to anyone. I was born in Portland, Oregon in 1986, to Richard and Catherine Mara. Richard was a civil engineer who liked being alone with blueprints and calculations. Catherine was a special education teacher who liked people, but only the ones who fit into her carefully arranged structures. They had Monica first, Monica in 1984, who came out of the hospital with a full head of dark hair, and what would eventually become obvious was the kind of charisma that makes people want to rearrange their lives around you. Then they had me. My mother has told the story of my birth exactly once when I was 16. I was doing dishes and she was drying, and without preamble she said, "You were supposed to be a boy. We had decided on Michael if you were a boy." Then she set down the plate she was holding and walked out of the kitchen. I never asked about it again. I didn't need to. The information was there. I had arrived and immediately disappointed the design. I don't blame my parents for this. Not anymore. I understand now that they were doing the best they could with the emotional vocabularies they had, which is to say they had almost none. What I understand now, what it took me until I was 35 years old to fully understand, is that their limitation was not my failure to be seen by them. But at 7 years old I didn't understand any of that. I only understood that Monica could sing, and when she sang, people stopped what they were doing. That Monica could draw, and when she drew, the drawings went up on the refrigerator. That Monica could talk to anyone, and when she talked, adults leaned down to listen. That Monica had somehow accidentally unlocked the code to existing as a person that other people wanted to know. And I understood that when I brought home a blue ribbon science fair project on water purification systems, I'd designed the display myself, included peer review citations, had spent 40 hours on research. My parents drove me to school, dropped me off at the gymnasium, and went to a dental appointment. They didn't stay. They didn't even take a photo of me with the project. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Hendricks, finding me afterward and asking where my family was, and I remember the specific sensation of being made of glass, completely visible but nobody looking. The years piled up like this, Small moments of invisibility. Monica was the main character. I was the supporting cast she occasionally had to acknowledge. I say this not because I'm bitter, I'm not or not anymore, but because you need to understand the baseline. I was raised in a home where being exceptional at something went completely unnoticed if you were the second daughter. I was raised in a place where I learned that wanting recognition was something only Monica was allowed to do. So I stopped wanting it. I redirected all that need inward. I became the kind of child who read medical journals for fun, who spent lunch periods in the library, who joined Model United Nations and Debate Club and the school's volunteer EMT program, not because I was particularly ambitious, but because no one was watching, so I could try things without failing publicly. That was a different kind of invisibility, though. It was invisibility by choice. It was the invisibility of someone who had already learned, by 14 years old, that the only way to survive in this family was to not need anyone's approval to function. By the time I was 16, I had made a decision I didn't consciously know I was making. I was going to become the kind of person who was so clearly competent, so evidently necessary, that people couldn't ignore me. I was going to become someone whose absence would leave a hole. I was going to become a doctor. I got into Johns Hopkins for pre-med when I was 17. It was the best school on my list, the hardest to get into, the one that felt like proof. I remember opening the email on a Tuesday morning before school, and I remember the specific sensation of my ribs becoming lighter. This was it. This was the moment my parents would see me. This was the inflection point where I became someone worth knowing. I waited until dinner to tell them. I wanted to say it when we were all there, when Monica could hear it, when there was no room to slip the information into some corner of conversation where it could be forgotten. I remember the way the kitchen light hit the table. I remember Monica was wearing a Harvard sweatshirt, even though she went to Berkeley. I think she was performing for someone that day, but I don't remember who. I remember my father had his hands loosely clasped in front of him, in that way he did when he was thinking about something else. I got into Johns Hopkins, I said, for pre-med. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. My mother looked at me, my father looked at my mother, Monica looked at her dinner. Then my mother smiled, and it was the first time I'd seen her smile at me that year, that decade. She said, "Oh, Rooney, that's wonderful, that's truly wonderful." And she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was the kind of moment that should be small, should be normal, should be something any parent does when their daughter gets into an elite university. But it wasn't normal for me. It was resurrection. "That is quite an accomplishment," my father said, and I could see him recalibrating me in his mind. It was like watching someone adjust a microscope to get a clearer picture. There was a girl at this table he hadn't been paying attention to, and suddenly she was worth looking at. Monica didn't say anything that night. That's when I should have noticed. That's when I should have understood that some part of her had been monitoring the attention in this house like a seismograph, and she just felt a tremor in her own direction. But I was too busy feeling, for the first time in 17 years, like I existed in the way that mattered here. What I didn't realize was that I had just made myself a threat. There was a girl at Johns Hopkins named Sarah Kirkland. She was from Connecticut, had gone to one of those private schools where everyone's family knew everyone else's family, and had a kind of easy confidence that I had never encountered before. She was not smarter than me. She was not more talented than me, but she had something that I didn't. She had never been invisible, and as a result, she didn't assume that the world owed her anything. She just expected that she belonged wherever she went. We lived in the same dorm sophomore year. Within 6 months she had become, I realize now, the person I'd been unconsciously searching for my entire life, a mirror that showed me I wasn't broken. Sarah was the first person I ever told completely, honestly about my family. We were in our dorm room at 2 a.m., and I was crying about something small. My mother had called, and in the background I'd heard her mention that Monica was engaged, that the wedding was going to be in the family backyard, that they were finally going to have a proper family celebration. And I'd understood, in the way you understand things that don't need to be said, that I was not part of that proper family, that my achievements, my presence, my existence, was somehow a mark against the family's record rather than for it. Sarah held me while I cried, and then she said something that changed the shape of my insides. "Your family is broken, and it's not because of you." I spent the next 6 years telling Sarah everything, every small wound from home, every phone call with my mother that ended with me feeling like I'd said something wrong without having any idea what, Every achievement I didn't bother mentioning to my parents because I already knew it wouldn't matter. Every place I was succeeding while still feeling, in some fundamental way, like I was failing at the only thing that actually counted, being a person my family wanted to claim. I was feeding Sarah information without realizing I was building a case. I was giving her all the evidence she would ever need to understand who I was, and what I'd survived, and what I was building. What I didn't know was that I was also giving Monica the exact same information. Because Sarah was friends with Monica through an alumni network thing I barely understood. Because Sarah, being the kind of person who believed in connection and reaching out, had kept in touch with my sister. Because I had never thought to ask Sarah if she knew my sister. And because I had trusted, completely and without question, that the person who saw me would also be someone who would see me asterisk, not the broken family version, not the daughter, who doesn't fit version, but the actual Rooney. I found this out the way you find out about most betrayals, indirectly through a phone call at the exact moment when I should have been celebrating something. I was 25 years old. I was in my first year of medical school at Johns Hopkins, right back where I'd started, except now I was no longer a pre-med student or a chemistry major. I was someone with MD in their future, someone who had made it through the obstacle course and was now in the actual program. I was on my surgery rotation, early hours, early mornings, standing beside surgeons as they opened people up and fixed the unfixable things inside them. My cardiothoracic attending surgeon, Dr. James Whitmore, was the kind of surgeon who noticed things. He noticed when you prepared properly and when you cut corners. He noticed when you were thinking about the anatomy and when you were running on autopilot. And he noticed when you had potential. One morning after a particularly complex valve reconstruction, he asked me to stay after rounds. My first thought was that I'd made a mistake, that I'd done something wrong. My brain immediately went to the thing it always goes to. I had failed. But he pulled me aside and said, "Mara, you have a steady hand. More than that, you have a mind that understands systems. I'm putting in a recommendation letter for the top cardiothoracic fellowship programs. If you want it, you could have a real future in cardiac surgery." It was 5:30 in the morning and I was sleep deprived, and I was absolutely certain I was going to cry in a hospital supply closet, but I held it together and said, "Thank you, Dr. Whitmore." He said, "Don't thank me, do the work. The work is what matters." I called Sarah that afternoon. I didn't call my parents. I didn't tell Monica. I didn't mention it to anyone except Sarah, who cried actual tears and said, "I always knew you had this in you," and then took me out for terrible Thai food and let me talk about what cardiac surgery meant, about the possibility of spending my life fixing the one organ that keeps people alive, about finally, being good at something that mattered in a way I could feel in my bones. That was the last private joy I ever had with my family. 2 weeks later my father called me. His voice had something in it I'd never heard before, something like disappointment but sharper, something like anger that had been simmering while I wasn't looking. "Your mother is very upset," he said. No greeting, no preamble, just, "Your mother is very upset and frankly so am I." About what? I asked, though I already knew. I always knew with my family. The question was never what, but which version of what they'd decided was true. About the fact that you apparently told Sarah Kirkland, a virtual stranger, about a medical recommendation before telling your own mother. About the fact that we had to hear about your accomplishments secondhand. About the fact that you're apparently telling people that your family doesn't support you. The world did that thing where it gets very still and very loud at the same time. "I haven't told anyone that," I said, "and Sarah is my best friend. I tell Sarah things." "Apparently you tell Sarah that we're unsupportive. Apparently you tell Sarah that we don't notice your achievements. Monica mentioned that Sarah was very concerned about you, about how your family dynamic was affecting your mental health. And frankly, Rooney, I think you're being manipulative and ungrateful." The accusation didn't land because it was true. It landed because it was so clearly not true, and yet he believed it so completely that there was no way to argue with it. To argue with it, I would have to argue with the version of me that existed in Monica's description, and that version had already been brought to life and fed, and given a narrative arc. "I never said I started." "Your mother doesn't want to hear your explanations," he said, and then he hung up. That was the tone of his voice that crystallized it for me, the tone of someone who had already made a decision and was simply informing me of where things stood. Not the tone of someone who was confused or hurt and open to clarification. The tone of someone who had, at some point in the past few weeks, decided I was a liar and was now simply confirming what he'd already concluded. I called my mother, she didn't answer. I called her again. This time she answered and immediately said, "I can't talk to you right now." "Mom, I don't know what Monica told you, but—" "I don't appreciate your tone," she said. "I don't appreciate that you felt comfortable discussing the intimate details of our family with someone outside this family. That's a violation of trust." "I talked to my best friend about my feelings. That's not a violation of trust, that's having a support system. Your best friend apparently thinks you're a victim of your own family, and now she's spreading that narrative around. Do you understand how that makes us look?" And there it was, the thing that had always mattered more than the thing that was actually true, how it made them look. "What exactly did Monica say to you?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Monica is concerned about your mental health," my mother said. "She thinks you're developing a persecution complex, and she doesn't think it's healthy for you to be alone back east telling people that your family is neglectful." "I never said we were neglectful. I said I felt invisible sometimes." "That's the same thing, Rooney, and it's hurtful. It's very hurtful to have sacrificed everything for you kids and to hear that you felt invisible. The thing about this accusation is that it made it impossible to do anything but fail. Because the only way to prove that you didn't feel invisible would be to never have felt invisible, and the only way to never feel invisible would be to never have been invisible, and the only way to never have been invisible would be to be someone else entirely. And there was no way to explain this to my mother without sounding like I was attacking her, which would mean I was being ungrateful, which would mean I was the problem, which would mean the conversation was over. "I have to go," I said. "I think you should consider talking to someone professionally," she said. "Someone who can help you understand why you're choosing to be so negative about your family." I hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't send an email. I sat in my apartment in Baltimore and felt the ground underneath me shift in a way it would never fully shift back. What I didn't know was that this was just the overture. What I didn't know was that this was Monica laying the foundation for a narrative that would take on a life of its own. What I didn't know was that Monica had been waiting for years for me to become successful, because she understood something about our parents that I was still learning. That success in this family, if you were the second daughter, was a threat that needed to be neutralized. I didn't know yet that Monica had needed something from me, and what she needed was for me to stay small, to stay quiet, to stay in the place I'd always occupied. And when I stopped doing that, when I started building a future that actually meant something, she did what she'd been trained to do. She told a story that made me the problem. The next 4 months were the longest of my life, and I've spent a year in residency running on 4 hours of sleep per night in a surgical ICU, so that's saying something. My mother did not answer my calls. When I called from a hospital phone number she didn't recognize, thinking maybe she'd blocked my personal number, she answered and then hung up when she heard my voice. I sent an email. It bounced back, not a technical error, she just filtered it. I sent a physical letter explaining again what had actually happened, what I had actually said, providing context. It came back with return to sender, written on the envelope in handwriting that I didn't recognize. I called my father. He was cordial in the way that made it clear he was no longer willing to have a relationship with me, but would be polite about it for the benefit of his own narrative. He said, "Your mother is very hurt. When you're ready to apologize for your behavior, we can discuss moving forward." "I haven't done anything wrong," I said. "That attitude is exactly the problem," he said. "You refuse to take responsibility. You're always the victim in every scenario." I was not a victim. I was a liar, according to his version. Or I was someone who had manufactured drama. Or I was someone who was using my family as a scapegoat for my own failures. The narrative kept shifting depending on what version he needed to justify the distance he'd decided to keep. I called Monica because I still thought in some part of me that my sister and I were on the same team, that we'd built some kind of alliance across the gap of 5 years and different coasts. I was so profoundly wrong. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them the truth," she said. "I told them that Sarah has been coaching you to believe that our family is toxic and that you're not thinking clearly because you're too deep in it to see it." "That's insane. That's not what happened." "Rooney, I'm trying to help you. Mom and Dad are worried that you've gotten involved with someone who's manipulating you. Sarah obviously has her own issues with family, and she's projecting them onto you. You're describing a relationship where Sarah has pulled me out of my mind and into a fantasy where my family is bad. That's not what happened. I told Sarah about my experiences and she validated them. Those are two different things. You're not seeing it, Monica said, and her voice had taken on a pitying quality that made my skin crawl. You're too close to it. That's what manipulation does. It makes you think you're being helped when you're actually being hurt. I hung up. I didn't call back. I understood in that moment that my sister had made a choice, and that choice had nothing to do with me. The choice was about her, about maintaining whatever image of family she had constructed for herself, about not allowing anyone else to have an interpretation of events that competed with hers. The isolation was complete. By the end of that month, I had a list of statistics that felt very important to keep. 14 unanswered calls to my mother. 7 returned letters. 3 emails sent to each of my parents. 1 voicemail from my father saying he'd prefer it if I didn't keep trying to contact the family. 0 acknowledgement from Monica. 0 family contact during the month. I had emergency appendix surgery while in medical school and spent 5 days recovering in a hospital room that had no visitors. That last one was when I understood, with a clarity that felt like looking at something through a surgical scope, that I was no longer part of this family structure. I had been removed, I had been excised, and there was no explanation I could provide that would change that because the explanation they had accepted was more convenient than the truth would ever be. Here's what I'm most proud of: I didn't break. Not because I didn't want to. Not because I didn't spend entire nights on the floor of my apartment, wondering what I had done to deserve to be treated like a contagious disease. Not because I didn't call the hospital where I was doing my rotation and ask if I could take a medical leave, half believing that I was actually the person Monica had described, manipulated, twisted, unreasonable. I didn't break because Sarah Kirkland physically didn't let me. Sarah had a key to my apartment, a key I'd given her years ago before the darkness started. She came in 3 nights after my father's final voicemail and found me sitting in my bedroom, clothes piled on the bed, having made a list of all the ways I'd disappointed my family. She didn't say anything. She just sat down, read the list I'd written, and then threw it in the trash. "Rooney," she said, "listen to me. Your family is broken. It is not your responsibility to fix it by pretending you don't exist." I remember asking her, what if they're right? What if I'm the problem and I just can't see it? She said, what if you stop trying to diagnose your family's dysfunction and instead focus on the fact that you're in medical school at Johns Hopkins and you're failing classes because you're waiting for people who don't deserve you to tell you that you matter? I didn't have a response to that, so I listened. Sarah organized my life in a way that probably saved my life. She made me go to class. She made me eat. She made me understand that the empty space where my family should be could be filled, maybe not with family but with something that worked. Purpose. I threw myself into work. I mean that in the most literal sense. I threw myself into my studies and my rotations and the belief that what I could do with my hands, what I could learn with my mind, was enough. It had to be enough because it was all I had. I made it through medical school, not triumphantly, not with any sense of vindication or journey narrative. I made it through because I showed up, because I did the work, because I understood by then that excellence was the only language my family would understand, and maybe, if I was excellent enough, if I was successful enough, if I was undeniable enough, they would have to acknowledge that I existed. I did my residency in Boston at Mass General. The chief of surgery was a woman named Dr. Margaret Chen. She was 62 when I started, had been the first woman to achieve full cardiothoracic privileges at that hospital, and didn't have time for people's excuses or their trauma narratives. She was technical perfection and no bullshit pragmatism wrapped in a human-sized body. "You're good," she told me in the middle of my 2nd year, "but you're distracted. I can see it. You're not present during surgery. Part of your mind is somewhere else. Fix that or you don't have a future in this specialty." I remember being defensive. I remember saying, "I'm doing fine. My surgical scores are in the top quartile." "Top quartile," she repeated. "That's not good enough. I don't want top quartile. I want surgeons who are all the way present, who can hold an entire system in their mind while their hands are moving, who aren't carrying around excess emotional weight that's going to make them hesitate when they shouldn't." It was the most direct challenge anyone had given me about my interior life. My family is not speaking to me, I told her. They haven't spoken to me in 3 years. It's not distraction, it's just grief. Yes, she said, which is affecting your work. So either you process the grief or you stop trying to become a cardiac surgeon, because I won't let you practice cardiac surgery while you're using your patients' hearts as stand-ins for your own emotional damage. That's not professional. It's not ethical. It's not acceptable. I started therapy that week. I found a therapist named Dr. Robert Heller, who specialized in family trauma and didn't believe in the kind of reconciliation fantasy that movies sell you. For the first time in my life, I was in a space where I could articulate exactly what had happened, that I had been made into a scapegoat, that my sister had weaponized information I'd shared in confidence, that my parents had chosen to believe a narrative that allowed them to maintain the family structure they understood, without anyone trying to make it better. They may never acknowledge what happened, Dr. Heller said to me, probably around month 6. They may go to their grave believing Monica's version of events, and you may need to grieve that, not because it's your job to help them understand, but because you will need to let go of the hope that understanding is possible. The work was not glamorous, it was not a transformation. It was accepting one day at a time that I was not going to get an apology, I was not going to get an explanation, I was not going to get the moment where my parents called me crying and said they'd made a terrible mistake. I was not going to get closure, I was going to get to decide every single day to keep building my life without them. This is what not breaking actually looks like, not strength, not resilience, not some inspiring narrative about overcoming adversity. It looks like showing up for work when you're hollow. It looks like eating food when you're not hungry. It looks like getting into bed at night and accepting that you're going to feel sad for a while, maybe forever, and that's okay. It looks like being a human being with a hole in her chest and deciding every day that the hole is not going to kill her. By the time I was 30 years old, I had completed medical school, completed a 5-year surgery residency, completed a 3-year cardiothoracic fellowship, secured a position as a cardiac surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, published research on valve repair techniques, been recognized as one of the top 40 surgeons under 40 by a prominent medical journal, achieved the exact thing I'd decided, at 14 years old, I was going to achieve. I had become someone whose absence would leave a hole. And I had done it all while my family was not speaking to me, while my mother had no idea what I did for a living beyond the vague sense that it was something medical, while my father had never attended one of my graduations, while Monica was still, presumably, winning awards for being more charismatic than I was, in circles I would never enter. The success didn't feel like victory. It felt like proof. It felt like evidence I was submitting to a court that would never rule. My mother called me on a Tuesday. Not my cell phone, my hospital line, the line I had never in 8 years given to my family, the line that I reserved for referring physicians and patient families and the rare professional colleagues who needed to reach me outside the standard channels. Someone had dug it up. Someone had made the effort to find it, to look it up, to acquire this piece of information. It was 3:15 in the afternoon, and I was in my office between surgeries, and the hospital operator said, "Dr. Mara, there's a call from a Catherine Mara. She says it's urgent." The way my hands responded, I remember that very clearly. My hands started shaking, not trembling, shaking, the hands that held people's hearts the way other people held eggs, the hands that had been trained to absolute steadiness. Those hands were shaking because my mother was on the other line. "Okay," I said, "put her through." I didn't say hello, I didn't say my name. I picked up the phone and waited. "Rooney," my mother said, "it's Catherine." 8 years since I'd heard her voice. 8 years since the last phone call where I begged her to understand that Monica had misrepresented what I'd said. 8 years of birthdays and Christmases and hospital stays and achievements that I hadn't told anyone about. 8 years of building a life that was so thoroughly separate from the one I'd been born into that sometimes I forgot I'd ever been part of a family at all. "Hive," I said. "Your sister has had an accident," she said. "There was a car accident. She's being brought to Massachusetts General. They said she needs emergency cardiac surgery. They said your hospital has the best cardiac surgeon in the region, and her voice broke, "I looked you up and it's you, you're the surgeon." The world became very clear at that moment. The kind of clarity that happens right before surgery, where everything except the task at hand falls away. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened," I said. My mother told me. Monica had been driving on 95 North in heavy rain. A truck had lost control, crossed the median, hit her car broadside. She had massive internal injuries, ruptured spleen, multiple fractures, and cardiac contusion, a bruised heart. The impact had damaged the right ventricle wall, and she was going into cardiogenic shock. "Is she conscious?" I asked. "I don't know, I'm not there yet, I'm in Connecticut. Richard is already on his way, but I'm still 3 hours out. Rooney, they said, the trauma surgeon said, she might not survive without the surgery. And he said the surgery is incredibly dangerous. He said the damage." "I know," I said. "I understand. Is she in our hospital?" "Yes, the ambulance is almost there." "Okay, I'm going to go look at her chart. I'm going to evaluate her condition. And I'm going to make a decision about whether I can be her surgeon." "You'll do the surgery, won't you?" my mother asked. I couldn't answer that. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was actually capable of doing in the presence of my sister's body on an operating table. "I'll call you back," I said, and I hung up. Monica was already in the operating room when I got there. The trauma team had gotten her stable enough to transport, but barely. She was on a ventilator, her body still, the kind of still that unconsciousness provides. I could see her from the observation window before I went down to review her imaging. She looked like she was sleeping. She looked like she was still the person who had decided to weaponize my vulnerability and turn it into a narrative that my family could consume. She looked like someone who had destroyed my relationship with my parents for the sake of maintaining her own mythology. And she looked terrified, even unconscious. There was a tension in her body that spoke to the trauma it had endured. I pulled up her imaging. The cardiac contusion was significant. The impact had damaged the muscular wall of her right ventricle. The heart was compensating by working harder, but it wasn't going to be able to sustain that for long. If we didn't repair it, the ventricle would fail. If the ventricle failed, she would go into cardiogenic shock. If she went into cardiogenic shock, her organs would start to shut down. She would die. It would take 8 hours of surgery. It would require opening the pericardium, assessing the damage, and performing a direct repair to prevent the wall from rupturing further. It would require me to put my hands on my sister's heart and fix the unfixable thing inside her. I walked back to the observation window. The decision I made in that moment, and I want to be very clear about this, was not made out of forgiveness. It was not made out of family obligation. It was not made out of any sense that I owed Monica anything. I decided to operate because I had spent the last 13 years training my mind and hands to save lives, because that training didn't come with an exception clause for people who had hurt me, because the moment I started deciding which patients I would save based on who deserved saving, I became something other than a surgeon. I became an executioner. I went to the locker room and changed into surgical scrubs. I had my hands scrubbed. I walked into the operating room where my sister was already prepped and open and waiting. "All right," I said to the team, "let's see what we're dealing with." The next 8 hours were the longest and most focused 8 hours of my life. I should tell you what cardiac surgery feels like. I should tell you about the specific sensation of having someone's heart literally in your hands, beating against your palm, trusting you with the most essential thing it knows how to do. I should tell you about the weight of it, the warmth, the strange vulnerability of it. I should tell you that every surgery feels like a small miracle, but that knowing the person, really knowing them, knowing what they've done and who they've hurt and how their existence has affected your life, changes the quality of the miracle. With Monica, it felt like archaeology, like excavating something buried. Like opening a tomb and finding that the person inside was still breathing. The right ventricle wall had a longitudinal tear. It was bleeding into the pericardium, which was filling with blood like a water balloon. The heart was struggling. Every beat was an act of faith that the muscle would hold together one more time. I repaired the tear with sutures small enough to see only under magnification. I worked with a precision that comes from absolute focus, from years of training, from the understanding that a single miscalculation would mean my sister would never wake up. 6 hours into the surgery, my chief resident, Dr. Ramesh, whispered, "Dr. Mara, are you okay?" I didn't understand the question for a moment. I was more okay than I'd ever been. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was trained to do. I'm fine, I said. Just keep your retractor steady. 8 hours and 17 minutes after I started, I closed. Monica's heart was beating, the repair was holding, the bleeding had stopped, she had survived the surgery. Good work, everyone, I said, and I turned away from the table while the team began their closing procedures. I had to go speak to my parents. They were in the surgical waiting area, which is a specific kind of room designed to be comfortable for people experiencing acute crisis. There are soft chairs and windows with natural light and coffee that tastes like it was made approximately never. My mother was standing when I came through the door. My father was sitting with his head in his hands. I was still in my surgical scrubs. I still had that particular feeling surgeons get after long cases, that feeling of having lived in an elevated state of intensity for hours, and then suddenly being dropped back into regular reality. I felt separated from this space. I felt like I was observing it through glass. She made it through the surgery, I said. The repair was successful. We've repaired the torn ventricle wall and her heart is responding well to the support. She's in the ICU now. She's still on a ventilator, still unconscious, but the initial indicators are positive. My mother made a sound that was part relief, part sob. My father looked up at me and something moved across his face. I watched it happen. I watched him see me, really see me for the first time in 8 years. In his eyes I could see it all at once. The daughter he had cut off. The daughter who had just saved his favourite daughter's life. The daughter who existed in a white coat in an operating room in a hospital he didn't fully understand. The daughter who had become undeniably necessary. I watched him take in the badge hanging around my neck. The badge that said Dr. Rooney Mara, cardiac surgery. The badge that contained the proof of everything I'd been telling him for 8 years, that I existed, that I was good at what I did, that I had become the kind of person who mattered in the world. Thank you, he said. Thank you for, he couldn't finish. She's not out of the woods yet, I said, because I wasn't going to let him off with gratitude. She's going to have a long recovery. There's still a risk of arrhythmia, infection, complications, but the cardiac repair is solid. She has a good chance. Will she wake up? My mother asked. We're going to reduce her sedation over the next 48 hours and see how she responds. If everything goes according to plan, yes, she should wake up. Can we see her? My father asked. I was about to say yes. I was about to direct them to the ICU and tell them visiting hours and answer all the questions they would have about tubes and monitors and what a recovery would look like. And then I stopped. Because I realized something in that moment. I realized that I had just spent 8 hours fixing my sister's heart while she was unconscious and helpless and completely dependent on my skill. I realized that I had made a choice to be the professional, to be the surgeon, to be the person who sets aside personal feeling for the sake of the work. But I didn't have to keep making that choice. Before you see her, I said, I need to tell you something. 8 years ago, I said, my mother called me and told me I was no longer part of this family. This was based on information that my sister provided, information that was not accurate, information that was designed to make me the problem instead of allowing anyone to look at what was actually happening. My father stood up. Rooney, this is not the time. It's the only time, I said, because right now you see me as the person who just saved your daughter's life, and I want you to understand something very clearly. I saved her life because I'm a surgeon, because I have a skill, because I made an oath to do no harm, and that oath doesn't come with exceptions for people who have hurt me personally. My mother had sat down. She was looking at me like she didn't recognize me. But I also need you to understand what you ask me to do, I continued. You ask me implicitly to choose between being a person who has been deeply hurt and being a professional who saves lives, and I chose to be a professional, but I'm not going to pretend that this choice erases what happened. I'm not going to pretend that 8 years of silence is something I'm just going to move past because a crisis forced you to look at me. Rooney, my father said, and his voice had that tone it always had, the tone of someone who wanted to fix this by explaining it away, by making me see reason, by getting me to agree to a narrative that allowed him to be not quite the villain. Your favourite daughter told you a lie, I said. I understand why you believed her. I understand that Monica is charismatic and persuasive. I understand that accepting her narrative was easier than accepting that your family was fractured. But you made a choice. You chose to believe her, and you've spent 8 years living with that choice. We didn't know, my mother said. We didn't know she was lying. Yes, you did, I said. Not consciously, maybe, but on some level you knew because I told you the truth. I called you, I sent you letters, I provided you with context, and you chose not to listen to me. You chose to interpret my attempts to explain myself as manipulation. You chose to believe that I was the problem. That was a choice. The room was very quiet. I operated on your daughter because that's my job, I said. It's not forgiveness, it's not a reset, it's not a way to move past this without addressing it. It's just what I do, I save lives, even when those lives belong to people who have hurt me. My father said, "Are you saying you won't see us, that you won't let us have a relationship with you?" I'm saying that I'm not going to pretend nothing happened. I'm saying that if there's going to be a relationship moving forward, it's going to be built on a foundation of truth. I'm going to need you to understand what you did. I'm going to need you to understand why what you did was wrong. And I'm going to need you to understand that I'm not the person who needs to apologize here. My mother was crying. "What do you want from us?" she asked. I had thought about this. I want to tell you I hadn't thought about this, that I was making it up in real time, that the words were just coming. But I'm telling you the truth, and the truth is that I'd spent the last 8 years imagining this conversation, and I'd played it out 1,000 different ways, and every version came down to the same thing. I want you to acknowledge what happened. I want you to tell me that you understand that Monica lied, and that you made the choice to believe her, and that you were wrong. I want you to tell me that you know I'm a good person and a good doctor, and that you're proud of me. And I want you to understand that none of those things are going to make the last 8 years go away. "We can do those things," my mother said. "Not right now," I said. "Right now you're in crisis. Right now Monica is in the ICU fighting for her life. Right now you're grateful that I exist because I just saved her. But in a week, when she's stable, when the gratitude fades, you're going to go back to your regular lives. And you're going to think that this crisis has reset everything, and you're going to think that we can go back to the way things were. And I need you to understand that we can't." "What does that mean?" my father asked. "It means that I'm going to treat you the way a professional treats colleagues," I said. "It means that I'll provide you with updates on Monica's condition. It means that if you're in a situation where you need medical advice, I can provide that. It means that if we ever reach a place where we can have a genuine relationship, we can discuss that. But it won't be the family relationship you had before. It can't be, because that family didn't include me." I could see my father working through this. I could see him trying to figure out how to negotiate, how to convince me that I was being unreasonable, how to make this something he could manage. "I need to get back to the ICU," I said. "Monica's going to need monitoring. I'll send someone to give you updates every 2 hours. You can sit with her for 15 minutes each hour, but she needs to rest. And I'm going to need both of you to understand that if you have any problems with the treatment plan, you talk to the chief resident, not to me. I'm off the case now that the acute surgery is done. Cardiomyopathy is going to take over her care." I turned to leave. "Rooney," my mother called after me. I stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." I could have said something. I could have walked back and hugged her. I could have said that of course I forgave her, that family was family, that love conquered all the things people say love conquers. Instead I said, "I know, but I need to get back to work now." And I left. Monica woke up 36 hours after her surgery. The first thing she did after the disorientation of consciousness returned, after she understood where she was and what had happened, was ask for me. Not for my mother, not for my father, for me. "I need to talk to my sister," she said. Her voice was hoarse from the ventilator, rough and strange. "I need to talk to Rooney." I had planned to avoid her. I had planned to hand off her care completely and let cardiomyopathy manage her recovery. I had been very clear about boundaries. But I was in the hospital, and I got paged, and I made a decision that I wouldn't keep making for the next several months. I went to see her. She was awake, sitting up slightly, tubes running everywhere, IV pumps beeping steadily. She looked fragile in a way I wasn't used to seeing people look, fragile in a way that made it clear how close she'd come to not existing anymore. "Hey," she said when I came into the room. I didn't say anything. I checked her vitals, looked at her chest, confirmed that the surgical site was healing properly. I was doing the thing a surgeon does. I was being professional. "I remember parts of it," she said. "The accident, the ambulance. Before the surgery, they explained what was happening. They told me that I had a cardiac injury and that I needed emergency surgery." "Yes," I said. "And I remember that the surgeon was you. Even though I was barely conscious, I remember they said your name, and I knew that you were the surgeon who was going to operate on me, and I almost asked them not to do it. I looked at her. I almost asked for a different surgeon, she said, and then I thought about how that would look, how that would feel asking your sister not to save your life, and I didn't say anything, I just went under, and I woke up here. You're very lucky, I said. The repair went well, your recovery should be. I need to tell you something, she said. I need to tell you before anyone else does, before you hear it from someone else. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be in this room having a conversation with my sister. I wanted to be anywhere but here. But I stayed. Sarah told me, Monica said. After Mom and Dad stopped talking to you, Sarah reached out to me. She wanted to know if I knew what had happened. And I told her the story I'd been telling myself. I told her that I was concerned about you, that I thought you were in an unhealthy relationship, that I was trying to help. Sarah told me, I said. Sarah told me that you'd been in contact with her and that you were the one who. She told me that what I'd done was cruel, Monica said. She told me that I'd lied to our parents in a way that was designed to hurt you specifically. And Monica had to stop. She was crying. I argued with her. I defended myself. I said that I was just worried, that I hadn't meant to hurt you, that my intentions were good. I didn't say anything. And she told me something that I haven't been able to forget, Monica continued. She said that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that if I had actually cared about you, if I had actually been concerned about your well-being, I would have talked to you directly. I would have asked you what was happening. I wouldn't have gone behind your back and told stories to our parents. She said what I did was gossip dressed up as concern. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I think I've always known, she said, that the reason I did it was that you were becoming more important than me. You were becoming the person everyone needed to talk to because you were the smart one, the one who was going to be a doctor, the one who had a plan. And I needed you to be the broken one instead. Because if you were broken, then I wasn't as invisible as I actually was. I understood then. I understood that Monica wasn't talking about me really. Monica was talking about herself, about the particular way that she had experienced invisibility, about the specific quality of being secondary, about needing to make someone else smaller in order to feel bigger. I'm not the person to apologize to, I said. I'm the person who was hurt. The apology isn't for me. I know, she said. I know that now. Did you tell our parents? I asked. Did you tell them that you lied? Not yet, she said. I wanted to tell you first. I wanted to give you the choice of whether you want to be in the room when I tell them, because they're going to be destroyed when they find out. And they're going to try to blame me, or blame the accident, or blame anything, but the fact that they chose to believe a lie because it was easier than dealing with the truth. That's right, I said. I'm so sorry, she said. I'm so sorry, Rooney. I didn't have a response, not because I wasn't ready to forgive. Forgiveness wasn't something I was thinking about at that moment. I was thinking about the specific fact that my sister had just told me she had lied, and that she was aware of why she had lied, and that she was expressing regret. But regret is not the same as consequence. Regret is what you feel, consequence is what you do with that feeling. I need to get back to work, I said. Will you tell them? She asked. Will you tell Mom and Dad? I think you should tell them, I said. I think they need to hear it from you. 3 months after Monica's accident, after she'd been discharged and had started physical therapy, after she'd begun the slow process of explaining to our parents what had actually happened, my mother called me. Not the hospital line this time, my personal cell phone which she'd somehow obtained. We'd been in cautious communication since the hospital, updates, brief conversations, nothing that felt like a real relationship but nothing that felt actively broken either. I'm making Thanksgiving dinner, she said, and I would like you to come home. Home, Portland, the house I hadn't been back to since I was 18 years old. I'm not sure that's a good idea, I said. I think it is, she said. I think it's time and I want you to be here. What does Dad say? He agrees, she said. Rooney, we understand, at least we're starting to understand, what happened, and we want to try again, not to go backwards but to move forward. I was suspicious of this offer. I was suspicious of the possibility that anything could actually be fixed. I had spent 8 years not believing in the possibility of reconciliation with my family, and a 3-month window didn't feel long enough to change that. But I went. The house looked exactly like I remembered. Same furniture, same paint colors, same photographs on the walls, except, and I noticed this immediately, the photo of me had been put back. The one that had been taken down when I was cut off. The one that had been replaced by, I found out later, Monica's engagement photo and a photo of Monica's husband. My mother hugged me at the door, not cautiously, but not the kind of hug that erases 8 years either, just a hug. I met my father in the living room. He was sitting in his favorite chair, and when he saw me, he stood up. He looked at me like he was trying to memorize me. "Hello, Rooney," he said. "Hi, Dad," I said. We didn't hug. We stood across from each other for a moment, and then I sat down, and he sat back down, and we looked at each other like we were trying to figure out who the other person was. "Your mother explained what happened," he said. "With Monica, we understand now that you were telling the truth." I said. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm deeply sorry for not believing you. I'm sorry for making a choice that hurt you. I'm sorry that it took an accident that nearly killed your sister to make me recognize who I'd actually raised." I didn't know what to do with this apology. I'd imagined it 1,000 times, but imagination is not the same as experience. In reality, the apology felt small. It felt like a gesture instead of a reckoning. "I appreciate that," I said, which was true and also insufficient. Monica came downstairs. She looked at me, and I saw something in her face that I hadn't expected to see, genuine shame. Not the kind of shame where you're ashamed that you got caught, the kind of shame where you understand that you've done something that can't be undone. "I told them," she said. "I told them everything. I told them why I did it and what I said, and I told them that it was all a lie from beginning to end." "Okay," I said. "Do you want me to tell you again?" she asked. "Do you want to hear it directly?" "Not right now," I said. "Maybe eventually, but not right now." My mother called us all to the table. There were 4 plates, not 5, just 4, my parents, Monica and me. We didn't talk much during dinner. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the silence of people who are trying to figure out how to exist in the same space again. After dinner, my mother brought out pie. It was apple pie, which had been my favorite when I was young. I hadn't had apple pie in probably 10 years. I ate it, and nobody said anything. And it was not a moment of redemption or healing or closure. It was just a moment where 4 people who shared a history sat around a table and tried, very carefully, to be in relationship with each other. "Thank you for coming," my mother said. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I set rules about what a moving forward looked like. I had learned over the years of silence that nostalgia and hope could make people forget what they'd promised to do, so I made things explicit. "I need you to understand that I'm not closing the door," I told my parents during a phone call the week after Thanksgiving. "But I'm the one who decides when it opens, and there are conditions." "What conditions?" my father asked. "The first condition is that you both acknowledge directly and explicitly what Monica did, why it was wrong, and how it affected me. Not once, but consistently, not just in the immediate moment but over time, because I need to know that you understand that what happened wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. It was a choice." "Okay," my mother said. "The second condition is that Monica does her own work. She goes to therapy, and she actually works on understanding why she felt the need to do what she did. And she doesn't just tell me she's sorry. She shows me over time that she's changed, that she thinks differently now, that she's not the same person who weaponized my vulnerability." "We can do that," my father said. "The third condition is that you don't try to make this into a fast fix. You don't invite me to family things and expect that one holiday dinner is going to erase 8 years of silence. You don't introduce me to relatives and act like nothing happened. You let me decide what kind of relationship I want with each person in this family, and you respect those boundaries. You don't negotiate with me about whether I should forgive people. You accept that I'm an adult who gets to make my own decisions about my relationships." "That's reasonable," my mother said. "And the last condition," I said, "is that you understand that some things can't be recovered. Some things are permanent. I will never have the relationship with you that I would have had if this never happened. That possibility is gone, but something new can exist in its place. Not the same thing, not as good as what could have been, but real." "I understand," my mother said. I didn't believe her, not completely, but I believed that she was trying. I want to skip past this part, but I can't, not completely, because the years between the first Thanksgiving and where we are now, where we actually have something that approaches a real relationship, are the important part, not the dramatic part, not the part where everything resolves, but the actual part where change happens. Change happens very slowly. It happens in phone calls where my father asks me about my surgical schedule instead of asking me how I'm doing emotionally. It happens in Christmas cards where my mother writes real sentences instead of just signing her name. It happens in Monica slowly, so slowly, understanding that the person I am now is the person I was always going to be, and that I'm not broken, and that me being successful doesn't diminish her in any way. It happens in me too. It happens in me slowly forgiving things that I thought I'd never forgive, not because I've decided that what happened was okay, but because I've decided that holding on to the anger is costing me more than letting it go costs. I went back to Portland once a year, sometimes for Thanksgiving, sometimes for Christmas, eventually just for visits, and each time I stayed a little longer. Each time there was a little more that felt like actual connection instead of obligation. 2 years after the accident, my father attended one of my surgical conferences. He sat in the back of the room while I presented research I'd done on minimally invasive cardiac repair techniques. After the presentation, someone asked me a technical question, and I answered it, and when I looked up my father was crying. "What's wrong?" I asked him afterward. "Nothing's wrong," he said. I never understood what you actually did. I never understood how complicated it was, how much skill it required, how much intelligence went into it. I just thought you were a doctor. But you're not just a doctor, you're an expert, you're at the top of your field. And I never told you that before, I never recognized that, and I'm sorry." It wasn't the apology I'd imagined, but it was a real one. 3 years after the accident, Monica got engaged. She asked me to be a bridesmaid. I almost said no. But then I thought about what it would mean to say no, and I realized that it would mean I was still defining myself by the hurt, and I was tired of doing that. I was a bridesmaid, I wore a dress, I stood in photos, and it was weird and imperfect and sometimes painful, but it was also real. It was me, present in my sister's life in a way that I wouldn't have been if I'd held onto the anger forever. My mother retired from teaching, and I came home for her retirement party. This time it was a real party, not the party that had happened in my absence, and she introduced me to her colleagues as my daughter, the cardiac surgeon, not as an afterthought, but as someone she was proud of. The funeral photograph, by the way, was eventually explained. My mother had used my senior photo in grayscale as part of a decorative display for the original retirement party. It wasn't meant to be a funeral photo, it was meant to be a sentimental representation of family growth or something. My mother said tearfully that she had wanted to show the evolution of her family from their early days to now. The grayscale was because there was a black and white aesthetic to the display. I'm not sure if I believe this explanation, but I'm also not sure if it matters. What matters is that when I confronted her about it, she didn't make excuses. She said, "I understand why it looked like a funeral photo. I understand why it hurt. I should have explained the context before you saw it, and I'm sorry." That was enough. I'm 38 years old now. I've been back in contact with my family for 3 years, actively trying to rebuild for 2 of those years. I'm a respected cardiac surgeon. I've published research. I've trained residents. I've saved hundreds of people's lives. I've developed a surgical technique that has been adopted by major cardiac centers across the country. And I still think about the silence. I still think about the specific texture of the years when no one in my family acknowledged that I existed. I still think about the way my mother's voice sounded when she finally called me. I still think about the fact that it took Monica almost dying for my parents to see me. But I also understand something now that I didn't understand before. I understand that my parents did the best they could with the tools they had. I understand that they were limited by their own emotional capacity, their own fears, their own need to have a family structure that made sense to them. I understand that what they did to me wasn't about me. It was about them. And I've made peace with that, not because I've forgiven them completely. I'm not sure that's something I'll ever be able to do, but because I've released them from the role of being the people who need to tell me that I matter. Here's what I learned through this. Your value isn't determined by whether your family can see you. Your worth isn't dependent on whether the people who raised you believe in you. You can be the most successful person in the world, and it won't matter to your family if they've already decided to believe a different story about you. So you have to decide. You have to decide that you matter to yourself. You have to decide that your opinion of yourself is more important than their opinion of you. You have to decide that you're going to keep going not because they're watching, but because you're watching. For me, that decision happened in small moments over 8 years. It happened when Sarah held me while I cried and said I was worth knowing. It happened when I walked into a medical school classroom and realized that I belonged there. It happened when Dr. Chen told me I had the hands of a surgeon. It happened when I operated on a patient and saved their life, and I realized that I mattered in a way that had nothing to do with my family. The reconciliation with my family, the 3 years of slow, imperfect rebuilding, that came after I had already rebuilt myself, that came after I had already decided that I was enough. That's why I can be in a room with my parents now without waiting for them to tell me something is good about me, because I already know. The permission. If you're reading this and any part of it felt like your story, if you've been cut off, if you've been made the scapegoat, if you've been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want to tell you something. You don't have to wait for them to come around. You don't have to organize your life around the hope that one day they'll finally see you. You don't have to structure your success in a way that's designed to convince them you matter, because, and I'm saying this as clearly as I possibly can, your mattering is not contingent on their recognition. Build your life for yourself. Build it brick by brick, day by day, in the knowledge that you are creating something that belongs entirely to you. Find people who see you. Find people who believe in you. Find people who hold you while you cry and tell you that your family is broken and that it's not your fault. Those people are your real family. And if at some point your biological family comes around, if they recognize what they've done and they try to change, then you get to decide what that means. You get to decide if it's enough. You get to set the terms. You get to protect yourself. And that is not selfish. That is self-preservation. Some relationships can be fixed. Some can't. Some can be partially repaired with deep fault lines that will never fully close. Some can be rebuilt on different foundations, not better or worse, but different. And all of those are okay. What's not okay is spending your life waiting for someone else to tell you that you're worth knowing. I still operate on my sister's heart in my mind sometimes. I still see the tear, the bleeding, the ventricle struggling to keep my sister alive. I still see my hands moving to repair it. I still feel the weight of having saved her life while my heart was breaking. And I think about the different version of events where I didn't go to that hospital, where Monica died in the ICU, where my parents never saw me again, where I successfully erased myself from the family narrative by simply ceasing to exist. I think about that version, and I'm glad it didn't happen, not because I think everything worked out beautifully, not because I think we all learned valuable lessons and grew as people, but because I'm glad I got to be the person who chooses to save someone even after they've hurt me. I'm glad I got to be the person who does the right thing for its own sake, not for approval or recognition or redemption. My name is Rooney Mara and I'm 38 years old. I'm a cardiac surgeon. I have a best friend who became my family. I have colleagues who respect me. I have patients who are alive because of the work my hands can do. And I finally have a family that's working on seeing me. It's not the family I wanted. It's not the family I might have had if things had gone differently, but it's real, and right now that's enough.